Hey there, welcome back. In this final section in this first course, where I'm going to talk about Azure Infrastructure Monitoring and Diagnostics, allowing you to get a good view on your Azure virtual machine, storage, and networking services. Again, a couple of different topics that I'm going to cover in this part is starting with what it takes to, really understanding the different Azure IaaS services, providing monitoring and diagnostic logging. Where the core components I want to cover is Azure Log Analytics, Azure Monitor, and Azure Network Watcher. Now, why is monitoring important? I give you a few seconds to go through this quote and finding out for yourself how critical management and monitoring actually is. Again, since this first part of the training was mainly around Azure infrastructure, only covering Azure IaaS monitoring and diagnostics here. So I'm not talking about other platform services for now. Where my personal quote is, you cannot measure what you don't know. Now, Azure can be monitored using Azure built-in services, and I'll walk you through some of those in the next couple of slides and demos. Now, know that Azure can also be monitored using non-Azure services. Any monitoring tool that allows like agent-based or IP port-based integration could be used within an Azure VM. Now, maybe you're not always having access to everything, like networking, storage might be a challenge, but for the basic monitoring, you don't have to use Azure built-in services, although I would personally recommend you to do so. And even more interesting is that several Azure monitoring tools actually support an Azure as well as a hybrid running environment. So the three main tools that I want to cover for monitoring Azure infrastructure is Azure Monitor, Azure Diagnostics, and Azure Log Analytics. Azure Monitor is a centralized dashboard giving you a central view to alerts, log analytics, and application insights, which again I'm not covering yet. That will come back in the monitoring application video course. It allows you to define monitoring information based on metrics, where depending a bit on the workload, depending on the operating system, it allows you to select different metrics, adding metric alerts, and finally configuring diagnostic settings. Where the diagnostic settings is again allowing you collecting host level metrics, but out of the Azure Diagnostics agent, which you need to enable explicitly, it also gives you guest level metrics info on top of the default Azure monitoring ones. Again, it needs to be enabled, but what it gives you is detailed performance counters, log files, crash dumps, if you want syncs, again depending a bit on application and operating system. So a screenshot here, enabling guest level monitoring would be the first step to allow diagnostic monitoring. And next to that, once the diagnostic monitoring agent has been deployed, you can configuring additional levels of monitoring, performance counters, crash dumps. That's the concept. So showing you what it looks like, let me start from the Azure Monitor. So the beauty here is that it's a service again, so you don't really have to deploy anything. It's active by default. And as you can see here, it allows you to integrate with essential monitoring, advanced analytics, and solution/application monitoring. So it starts with shared services, where it's allowing you to create centralized alerts, irrelevant from which Azure resource all your infrastructure monitoring alerts will be centralized here. So what you can define is what target you want to monitor, where the target can be virtual machine, storage, resource type itself doesn't really matter. So it's going to read out your Azure subscriptions, and based on that, allowing you to select, for example, virtual machines. You can select the VM you want to manage. Next, you define criteria. So what are different settings that you want to manage? And again, this is high level. So let's say I'm interested in CPU load, where next it allows you to define alerts, like if my CPU load goes above a certain level. Where the next thing is configuring alerts, like based on the criteria, defining an alert like CPU load, and next defining an action group where you specify, for example, receiving an email notification, receiving text messages, or integrating with runbooks, allowing you to execute certain scripts based on the CPU load and alert that you created earlier. Next, out of monitoring is a centralized overview of all metrics you can decide on based on the resource group, where it's going to read out the resource types, storage accounts, IPs, and VMs, which I think are like the minimal required ones. And depending on the resource, so if I'm selecting the virtual machine, it's going to provide you a full list of operating system, CPU system settings. If I select the public IP address as a different resource, then obviously the metrics will be different as well, mainly focusing on IP information. A redirection out of monitor to log analytics, and I'll talk about log analytics later on, but know that it's having like a pointer out of Azure Monitor, where you could see Azure Monitor as like a centralized high-level dashboard. Activity logging is another interesting Azure monitoring feature, where it's actually more like an audit logging, where it's keeping track of every operation, change, write operation. It's not keeping track of reads, but all activity going on in your Azure subscription will be audited here. And you can get a detailed view, like for example, out of some of the previous demos I did, it's going to tell you the write-out deployment, who initiated it, and providing you more details in a JSON file that you can export to find out like what service has been changed, what are the changes that actually happened, where here I created my virtual machine scale set. So you can find all that information in there. So the high level starting point for monitoring your infrastructure would be Azure Monitor. As I showed you, Azure Monitor supports different alerts, metric-based ones, activity log ones, and real-time metric alerts as well, which for now is in preview, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. The next one, Azure Log Analytics, formerly known as OMS Log Analytics, where OMS stands for Operations Management Suite. It's an extensive log search and analysis tool based on intelligent queries. It starts from a massive amount of data that's being collected from your Azure subscription and also supporting hybrid environments. Out of Log Analytics, it allows you to filter through collected data. And if you want, you can also run it from a dedicated Log Analytics portal or integrating with Power BI to get even more detailed logging statistics. So I can start from my monitor again, and it will redirect me to Log Analytics, or selecting Log Analytics as the service, where it starts from a workspace, and what it's going to do is reading out all logged information from the last couple of days. So the first scenario is search through all information. Now the challenge here is a little bit becoming familiar with the query language, but for a lot of detailed feedback, it also supports like filtering just by clicking around, and that's what I'm going to show you. So let's say for the last 7 days, provide me a list of everything that happened in my environment. And I was actually hoping for a little bit more data. So I'm going to try that again. Since it's connecting to the logging data in the backend, it takes a little bit of time to actually load the information. But as you can see, it's coming through. So what I did here is starting from like the higher level, starting from my workspace and moving to log search again. Once you become familiar with the query language, it's pretty similar to like SQL queries if you would be familiar with those ones. You can also create saving your searches, like provide me a list of all security events, provide me a list of CPU remarks, things like that, or for a specific virtual machine whatsoever. So let's try this again here for all items. Now what you can see here is it's actually helping you in offering default searches or the ones that you used before, where this one, just an example, would start from all log data items, providing the detailed view IIS logging for your specific workspace and providing the output in a table. But for now, again, trying to get a view on all data. And this looks at least a little bit better than the previous one. So what you can do, first of all, is selecting the time frame. So in roughly about a week when I started doing these demos, it's collecting about 3,000 events. In the security topic, in the previous sections, I already showed you security events. But for example, I can also get a view on overall system usage. So just by clicking around, as you can see, it's going to build up this query language and allowing you to make changes or filtering down on, for example, quantity unit, which would be another filter mechanism, or moving more down where it's filtering 21 results now. And what if I'm only interested in log management? Then it should be filtering those again. There we go. So that's really what it takes. From here, the advanced analytics, what it's doing is redirecting you to a portal.log analytics, which is a separate dashboard if you want, from where you can run the exact same queries and drilling down on all the details. So it's loading. That's in there twice, don't know why. So this is my output, and again, it's a pretty limited environment. But from here, I can drill down, getting all the detailed views, or selecting the filter mechanisms here on the left-hand side. Other things I can do is based on a search result query, again, injecting alerts. Like if that specific event ID comes up, then alert me about it. Where alerting again can be email, can be text messages, or integrating with runbooks. You can export the data to a CSV file or porting the data to Power BI and allowing you to run business data analytics on that side. Some other Azure monitoring options, Activity Log was already explained, the Network Watcher, which is a specific monitoring tool for networking components, and then wrapping it up with Azure Advisor and Resource Health. So Activity Log, the auditing, stores all information about Azure changes, like write operations, new creations, or changing operations, where the default behavior is that Activity Log keeps track of all changes during 90 days. If you integrate it with the extended version of OMS, where you need to pay for, you can also keep the track for longer than 90 days. And Network Watcher, as the other one, gives you some interaction with networking components, providing a network topology view, IP flow verify, allowing you to test network traffic between different endpoints from one VM to the other, from a VM to the internet, for example. Next Hub allows you to run some diagnostics on the gateway address in your network routing. Specifically interesting if you have custom routing defined. Security Group View is the topic within Network Watcher where you can get a detailed view on the network security groups. And then in the other side, two services that I'm actually using most out of Network Watcher is VPN Diagnostics, where it's running a scanning diagnostic process against your VPN site-to-site or point-to-site and providing you a zip file with detailed log files, helping you in troubleshooting why VPN connections are not running. And Packet Capture is the service that's actually mapping with Wireshark network capture solution, but this time from within the Azure environment, but still allowing you to open the cap file in your Wireshark solution. And showing you some of those capabilities as well. So the first thing you need to do for using Network Watcher is enabling it in the different Azure regions that you're using. So you can decide in which regions you want to run it. And if it's not enabled, then obviously you don't have the functionality available. So I'm going to focus on the two main characteristics or features that I'm using most. Not saying that the other ones are not that interesting, but those are the features that I see in the field are being used most. So the steps here is selecting the resource group, the virtual machine, providing a name for the cap file, and storing it in or an Azure storage account, or storing it in a file within the virtual machine that you're actually scanning. Now, my recommendation is using a storage account, since what if the virtual machine is not available? And maybe that's exactly what you're trying to find out using the network capture. Then it doesn't make a lot of sense to store the cap file within the virtual machine. So to speed up the process a little bit, since it's running for at least a minute, that's like the minimal setting. The default is an hour, which might be a little bit too long. So it's providing you an overview of the cap process and storing it in Azure Storage. Out of Azure Storage, you connect to your files, and here you can download the packet capture file. And obviously, depending on what you want to get out of it, you would use or Wireshark or the tool that I'm using, the Microsoft Message Analyzer, which is a free logging analytics tool. And from here, you would use some filtering mechanisms to, for example, drill down on the specifics, mapping it with an IP port. But for this one, I didn't do anything specific, so just showing you the process for creating the cap file. That's what I wanted to highlight. The other process that I mentioned as an interesting feature is VPN diagnostics, where the scenario is pretty similar. So again, you select the different resource groups that you have, and it's going to read out the VPN information. You select the gateway that you want to troubleshoot, that you want to scan, storing it again in Azure storage accounts, and running the process. And the output of this is again a detailed log file where it's creating a zip file, and depending if everything is up and running, like in my scenario here, I couldn't actually find any reason for shutting down the VPN without actually pointing that. The only thing it would tell you is that it stopped. But depending a bit on the root cause, of course, in like a production environment, I've seen at customers where, for example, the shared key, like the security secret for the VPN, was misconfigured on one side than on the other side. And out of these text files, it will literally tell you there's a misconfiguration in the shared key. So that's what I mean by being really helpful. And that's in short Network Watcher. Leaves me with another built-in tool, Azure Advisor, giving you recommendations for your specific subscription based on high availability, security, performance, and cost, where it's going to map it with Microsoft best practices. Like high availability, if you deploy a standalone virtual machine, it will recommend you to move to, for example, an availability set. If you deploy SQL databases in PaaS, it will recommend you to create a replication to another region, for example. The integration out of security is identical to Security Center that I covered in a previous section in this course. And lastly, some updates around performance and around cost, where it's actually checking your environment, learning from it, and providing you optimizations, like maybe moving to smaller VMs, maybe shutting down VMs over the weekend since nobody's connecting to it. Those kind of recommendations. Now, depending a bit on what your environment looks like, it's providing you really detailed logging, or like in my scenario, it's not providing a lot of feedback since my environment is a little bit too narrow for that. But like Security Center is loading, but high availability, for example, is not. Now, it might also change depending if virtual machines are offline or are running, because it's really performing the checkings against the real-time running environment. But it's definitely useful, specifically around performance cost, like the couple of examples I shared. It's definitely really, really useful. And lastly, the resource health is giving you a view on the underlying Azure platform, mainly useful when something is wrong, like the underlying platform, where you as a consumer, you don't really have any control. Where for the most recent 14 days, like 2 weeks, it's going to give you a list of what is the service in the platform that was not running, that was having issues, and it might help you. That's the main reason for actually exposing the data in pinpointing any root cause for issues in your own environment. So let's say that at some point in time, Azure Backup service was not running. Then it's not always that easy for you to find out why not. And out of this resource health, it might, for example, tell you that the night before in your specific Azure region, there was an issue with the underlying Azure storage platform, which would be a good reason why backup is failing. And showing you this as the last demo for this section here, It's going to pull up live information based on the different Azure regions that you are using. So for now, all my active regions that I'm using are all green. But what I want to show you here is the health insurance history, where, for example, it's telling me an issue from 1 day ago, where it's providing you the detailed information. This one is related to specific regions, where it's providing some changes in TLS encryption. Or a second one, a couple of days ago already, where log analytics in a specific East US region during a specific time frame actually had some issues, resulting in alerts being triggered but not sending out email notifications. So if you would have log analytics running and during that time frame not receiving any email without having this service health component available, you actually wouldn't have no clue what's going on. And that's the core interest of this service. Besides history checks or real time, it's also providing you a view on possible planned maintenance. Like, I don't know, maybe in 2 weeks from now, they're going to make some changes in the platform, doing monthly maintenance in the data center. Then they will also inform you about it here. Again, not a most critical tool, but next to that, it's actually really useful in getting a view on what's going on in the platform. And with that, I'm about finished with everything that I wanted to cover around Azure Infrastructure Services Monitoring, where Azure provided extensive features, services, allowing for detailed, almost real-time monitoring of platform and infrastructure components. Monitoring can be extended using diagnostics and alerting, and Azure Log Analytics is the powerful logging and reporting engine.